Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are remaining in America's finest city. And this week we'll be discussing public relations, strategic communication, an evolving media landscape. It always seems to evolve. Our guest this week is Natalie Terashima. She is currently a senior partner for Rachael Kay Public Relations. That is a Finn Partners company. She has been with Rachael Kay PR for 17 years. Natalie, it's great to meet you and welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Great to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
So based on your LinkedIn, it looks like you went pretty quickly, if not immediately, from San Diego State to Rachael Kay PR. Is that the case? Or tell us about just how long you've been with them and how that got going.
Yeah, I did. So RKPR was my first job. I was actually still a senior at State when I took the job with Rachael. And it was our mutual PR professor, Dr. Bailing Shaw, who actually connected us through the internship program at State. I remember, it's such a funny story, but I remember showing up to the interview with Rachael and I was, wanted to impress her. I was dressed in my little suit that I had just bought just to go out, and interview and start getting a job in the PR field. And she had just started freelancing on her own. So she was working from home. I didn't know that until I showed up. So I showed up at her front door. She answered the door with her, cats in tow behind her and was wearing slippers. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm so overdressed for this interview. But we ended up hitting it off, immediately. And I really loved the idea because back then some of her first clients when she was first freelancing, this was within the first 3 months of her going off on her own, were better for you food and beverage clients. And that's something that I've just always been really passionate about, nutrition and wellness. So I had never thought about doing PR for CPG brands and the types of products that, I'm already eating. So I got really excited about the opportunity to do that. And also it was a different type of an opportunity for me to be able to work hand in hand with someone who already had so much experience in the field. And I was very driven at that point in life to really fast track my career, and knew that I would be able to do that with Rachael. So out of the gate, we were, she was taking me on new business meetings and I was helping with strategy, although, I don't know that I was very good at it back then, but she still let me help. But I really got to have a hand in every facet of PR and strategic communication. So I learned a lot in that first year. And yeah, fast forward, I don't usually like to say how long it's been because it ages me, but yeah, it's been going on 18 years now. And we're now part of Finn Partners. So in September of 2022, we were acquired by Finn Partners, which is one of the world's fastest growing independent marketing agencies. So we're part of a much larger group now, many more resources. So it's been really exciting.
Well, whether it's journalism or PR, there's never a week that's the same. So I acknowledge that before I ask this question, but give us an idea of some of the types of things that you do, whether it's day to day, week to week, different partners that you're currently working for, and what it means to work in PR these days based on what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. So we still primarily focus on food and beverage, and we do have a lot of brands in the better for you and wellness space. So some of our clients are brands like, Oatly and Simple Mills, Evolution Fresh and Suja Life, Death Wish Coffee. But we do also have brands within the lifestyle and technology space as well. So we work with a robot vacuum company called Roborock. It's actually the world's number one robot vacuum brand now as of late last year. Smeg Appliances. So we have some fun, products within other areas outside of food. I would say that, you're right. No day is ever the same. I think that's one of the things that I still love about PR is that no 2 days are the same. There's always a surprise. You honestly will never get bored working in this field. But a typical day for me looks like, helping to advise clients on comm strategy, or maybe we're building a plan or a campaign for a big upcoming launch or a big consumer moment. Working with the team on media outreach. Sometimes we think that a certain pitch is really going to land and we're going to have amazing success, and for some reason it's not. So, really working with my team as well as the client in terms of real-time counsel. Our clients also are battling, deadlines, and their priorities often shift. And when that happens, that means we need to adjust our programs and how we're approaching things on the strategy side as well. So that also happens, quite frequently. So yeah, just really being kind of a resource and sounding board and helping to advise and pivot, when needed. That's happening on a day-to-day basis.
All right, let's rewind and let's talk about some of the San Diego State memories. You told us about Dr. Shaw. She's a huge presence for a lot of students, former students. Give us some more details about favorite San Diego State memories or classes and just some of the key moments as a student that helped get you where you are now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I took a little bit of an untraditional path, and I would say I always joke that I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I had a whole other career before I actually figured out that PR was my passion and what I wanted to do. So I started at the JC Mesa, and I think I declared like an international relations major or something like that at that time. I ended up switching to journalism because I had always loved communications. It came very naturally to me. I loved, writing. But I ended up finding out once I transferred to state, because I was writing for some local papers and doing some online editing, I was missing the creative aspect behind writing. A lot of times, and most of your students probably know this, but journalism, you have to be very objective. You have to follow AP style, news flow. You have to write whatever you're assigned. I was really craving something that would enable me to have a little bit more creativity and, kind of expand that area of my brain. So Dr. Shaw, she is amazing. I mean, she honestly changed the whole trajectory of my career. I remember it was my junior year at state, and I was a journalism major but hadn't declared my emphasis yet. So I was taking, a few different classes in terms of social media. One of the classes that I signed up for was this PR 101 Intro to Public Relations class that Dr. Shaw was teaching. I didn't know what PR was at the time, and she just opened my eyes to this whole new world of, being a driving force behind the news. And what I really loved about it was that really, no matter what you're passionate about, there's a publicist who's right there behind it, and they have such a critical role in being that intermediary between companies or nonprofits or brands or the government and the consumer. So I really love that it was such a versatile career path, and you could kind of be the driving force behind the news. I became very obsessed with that. Some of my other favorite memories from, that time was obviously meeting Rachael. I didn't know her before Dr. Shaw connected us. I remember going to a lot of, football and basketball games and, just the energy of state in the sports program, even though at that time, I don't think we were quite as good as we are now, but it was still very fun. But as a student at San Diego State, I was working full time. So I honestly didn't have a lot of time for, a lot of my extracurricular activity was working, anytime that I wasn't in class. So, and I was a little bit older at that time too. So I kind of didn't take that traditional student route, which it worked out well for me, but yeah.
All right. So this week, our intern, Tessa, got some questions from some of her fellow students. And I'm actually going to get into some of those questions now because it relates to what you had just mentioned. And so I want to get to one of them right away. Luis is a third-year media studies major, and he is involved in the Daily Aztec and 2 art magazines on campus. And he wants to know, what advice would you give for a student who's looking for an internship, similar to the way that you got an internship initially?
Yeah. So I would say, think about if you want I would recommend exploring agency. I think that especially for young, budding PR professionals, being in an agency environment is a really great way to get visibility and experience across a lot of different facets of what communications is and different types of, brands and companies and clients. If you know exactly what type of company you want to work for and, then go for an in-house role. But I would say that, it's important, especially in this day and age, for students to really network online and, think about LinkedIn, really follow, those agencies or, companies that you want to be, you want to have an internship at, engage in their posts, ask questions, make yourself visible. I would still recommend going through the traditional channels because a lot of hiring managers, you can't go outside of like the traditional channel in terms of applications and everything. But LinkedIn is a great resource and tool to stay up to speed on opportunities. And I'm sure State still has it, but I mean, I got my big break, I'll call it, with Rachael through the internship program at SDSU. I think the professors there are amazing. They're a great, wealth of resources for you. They also know you quite well, most likely. So they may even be able to match you up with an opportunity that, is right for your skill set.
You mentioned how Rachel was branching off on her own. What would be sort of the advantages of either someone who maybe is like Rachel now, who's branching off on her own, how you even find out, versus a well-established long-term type of agency?
Yeah. I think that every student really needs to make the right decision for themselves. Like I mentioned, I was a little bit older by the time I finally graduated. So I did not take the traditional, 4 years straight out of high school path. I had already dabbled in a lot of different things. So by the time I, had the internship with Rachel, I was really clear about what I wanted to do. And I really knew that I wanted to fast track my career. I knew that I was behind and I wanted to get a lot of hands-on experience. Hands-on experience was critically important to me. I did not just want to be building media lists or getting someone's coffee. That was not going to cut it for me. So, I was actually offered a position at a larger agency in town at that time. And I just decided, you know what, I'm taking a little bit of a leap of faith here, but I really feel like I can learn more if I'm, essentially, the right hand person to Rachel, who had just started freelancing on her own. So that was the right decision for me. Some people they may not be comfortable with that. So I think you just really need to know yourself and be honest with yourself about what you want out of the internship out of the gate and hopefully make the right decision from there.
All right, here's another one that I think relates to this. This is a fourth-year marketing major who wants to know, what tools or software do you use most frequently in your work?
Tools or software. I use the Microsoft Office suite every single minute of the day. We use Zoom a lot, especially since COVID. Most of our meetings are virtual. In-person meetings happen every now and then, but we are talking with clients and our team on Zoom and Slack, all of the time. I mean, other tools, we do use ChatGPT for things like research. I've, found that it is helpful for research and gathering quick insights very quickly, just pulling information from across the web. Other tools that my team uses really frequently are things like Meltwater for competitive monitoring and share of voice reports. We also use Cision for our media database. Our social team has a whole other suite of, tools and platforms that they use for social and influencer as well. We also do a lot of affiliate marketing. So we use platforms like Share a Sale and Awin and Skimlinks. But yeah, that's a handful.
Yeah, that's a lot. So at first I was trying to keep up with them, and then I realized, okay, I don't work in public relations. I don't need to know all these things. But this would be a good time, if someone who does, to rewind and make sure you write down all of those to become familiar with them. You
Yeah.
mentioned Chat GPT. We actually got two questions about AI. And so I'm going to fire off both of the questions because they are somewhat similar. We had a third-year business major who wanted to know, how have you seen the industry evolve, especially with the rise of AI? And then we also had Shanti, a fourth year media studies major, who wanted to know, with the rapidly advancing AI technology, what does that mean for those employed in creative positions? Is there a fear or refusal to fully embrace it, or is it currently being used to assist with certain tasks? Go ahead and go after either one of those. They're kind of similar as best you can, Natalie.
Yeah, sure. So I think, every agency is going to have a different way of leveraging AI. I definitely don't think that there is a hard line in terms of we are not going to use AI or a big push against it. I think that at least for, my team and for myself, we've been testing it out a little bit over the last, 2 years or whatever that it's been evolving. And, in the early days, we were testing out, well, could it come up with maybe a campaign concept? And I would say, so much of what we do in PR and, similar on the social side, it's really coming up with unique content, unique ideas, things that are not already out there. Same thing. I mean, even thinking about a press release, for example, if the product isn't out and it's never launched before, all you have is maybe like a brief to input. AI might be able to do it, but honestly, you're probably going to be able to do it better yourself once you've reached a certain point in your career. So I think that AI, as far as what I have found it useful for, it has been useful to say, get really, really quick inputs on research. Like it is helping to cut down what, a research project that could have taken maybe 2 or 3 hours. You can get some good insights immediately through AI, maybe identify where you might need to dig a little bit deeper. I think that's one of the primary areas where we're using it most frequently.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with one of my questions here because you mentioned influencers, and I saw that on your bio on the website for Rachael Kay. Tell us whether it's you or your agency's philosophy in terms of who are the influencers that we're going to approach and how are we going to utilize them to try to get the word out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, the area of influencer marketing has evolved so quickly. And, in this day and age, every influencer wants to be paid. Our philosophy is there's certainly a time and a place for that, but you also have to be strategic in thinking about the size of the brand and kind of the life cycle of the brand as well. If it's a brand that is just starting out and more in that startup phase, maybe, 1 to 5 or even 7 years, is it going to make sense for them to spend, 100,000 or 500,000 or $1 million on one influencer? I also think that, this is something that we talk with our clients about a lot is following is not everything. An influencer may have maybe, 5 to 10 million followers, but especially the more followers they have, a lot of times the engagement rates go down. It's complex in terms of the algorithms and how many views they're actually getting on their content once they're at a certain size. So we typically advise, having some sort of organic earned program with influencers that have high engagement rates, and they're definitely residing, in that target consumer demographic. So you want to make sure that the content that's being posted is really going to resonate with, who it's being shown to, and they might have a likelihood of going to check out your brand or your client, or hopefully, loving it so much that they're encouraged to make a purchase. So I think there's a lot of factors that it always kind of breaks my heart when I see brands spending a lot of money on influencers, especially before they're ready for it. And it's kind of eating up all of their budget. And then you're thinking kind of, now what, like, where do we go? Because it is hard sometimes to track the ROI in terms of sales performance on those things. So I think thinking about content and how it's going to resonate with the target consumer is our philosophy to approaching influencer.
I just thought of this right now, so I don't know if you're allowed to answer this or not, so we'll find out here. And I would think that it changes from influencer to influencer, but how often is it we specifically want or need you to do ABC as part of this, or how often is it just go ahead and use your own creative juices to try to do something with this? How do you kind of decide with the influencer what exactly they're going to do to influence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of times before we even reach out to the influencer, there's, there's a whole vetting and research process that has happened. So we really understand, what the audience is that, they're speaking to. We likely have good insight on the demographics of their followers. We understand the type of content that has worked really well, that they've gotten the highest engagement rates on. We understand their personality, their tone. So a lot of times, influencers and content creators, they're amazing at what they do, and that's why brands are so excited to partner with them, because they create this incredible content that's super engaging and have a way of educating consumers in a way that, brands sometimes don't have, from this different perspective. So usually when we're reaching out to influencers, we're briefing them in, giving them key details about, the brand itself, what products, we're talking about. We do a lot of retailer campaigns. So if anything, sometimes we like to make sure that a retailer is mentioned. But outside of that, it's really important, I think, to let them have a little bit of free reign and not make it too scripted, because, that also doesn't work. Consumers can tell if something is too scripted and is inauthentic, and that's not a piece of content that's going to do well.
I wasn't planning on asking you this many questions about influencers, but but I find it fascinating. And my next question is, maybe this would be a warning to those potentially getting scammed. Like every once in a while, I'll get a message on social media where they're like, "Oh, we love what you're doing. We want to work with you." And I'm like, come on, nobody cares about me, right? I do not have that type of following. Nobody cares about me. I know this is not real. And so I just press delete and ignore. But what should people know about if someone like yourself actually does want to work with you? What would an initial contact look like for real?
Like, say there's an inbound, how do you know if it's legitimate or not?
Yeah, like, are you just going to straight
Yeah.
DM somebody out of the blue about like, hey,
It's
we want
quite
to work with you, which I realize no one's doing that to me.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's like anything when it comes to communications and marketing. You have to do your research. So, we part of what we do for a lot of our brands too is, vetting inbound requests. So whether it's media or influencers or other companies or brands that want to, partner with our clients, it's important just to do your research and really, I mean, you are the expert on your client, or, Josh, in your case, you're the expert on yourself. So you have to decide if it makes sense after doing the research on them. So, look them up online, see if you can get a sense of what their engagement rate is. If it's a media, I know you were asking about influencer, but if it's, media or someone else who's reaching out about a partnership, try and get as much detail on your own. You'd probably use a little chat GPT for that if you wanted to.
Mhm.
But do your research so that you can really understand, most of them are legitimate, but I think the question to ask is not just, is it legitimate, but is it a good fit? Is we all have limits on in terms of our time and our resources, and what is going to make the most sense to actually spend the time on, or is it just busy work that would be a very low impact, type of an opportunity. But usually if you just do, 5 to 10 minutes of research, you can tell pretty quickly if it's going to be worth your while.
All right, let's switch gears because I want to ask you about PR events you guys did, which is near and dear to my heart. I work in minor league baseball for a team called the Albuquerque Isotopes, and there is a company that put together a campaign where every single minor league baseball team for one game became the Oat Milkers. They wore uniforms and everything else. I know what it was like on my end from the baseball side. Tell us from the PR side what it was like working with Oatly to create this brand of the Oat Milkers.
Yeah, that was such a fun campaign. I had a feeling you were going to ask about that. So we can't take all the credit for that. I want to be honest and transparent. So Oatly, their creative team is actually in-house. It's called the Oatly Department of Mind Control is their creative team. I mean, they are the brain children behind all of the amazing marketing stunts and, ads and everything that you've seen from Oatly. These guys are and gals are absolutely incredible. So Oatly came to us and said, "Hey, we have this multi-year, partnership with minor league baseball. We're thinking about doing this. What do you think?" We said, "Well, we love it. It's such a creative way to reach a completely new type of audience. They also had, a lot of people don't know this, but Oatly actually makes soft serve. So I believe that they actually had soft serve at some
Mhm.
of the games too. Did you have some of
Yep,
that?
we had some of that in Albuquerque. Yes.
Delicious, right?
Yes.
Telling them they need to sell it here in the States. So yeah, I mean, what we did, we did some sampling of the jerseys to editors and press. I mean, obviously, we did a whole announcement around it. We did, some outreach, especially to like news, sports, entertainment. I think, USA Today and a handful of other publications covered it. And then we had some pulses. So when the games were happening, we would do additional pulses in regional markets. But it was a really fun campaign, and I'm hoping that we might see more of that coming out since it was supposed to be a multi-year deal.
Yeah, well, you're coming back to Albuquerque next year. When I say we, I mean the oat milkers are coming back
Yeah.
to Albuquerque this
Get
next
a
season.
jersey?
I did not get a jersey. No, they did
We'll
not
have
let
some
them.
for you. I think we
Okay.
might still have some extras. I'll make myself a note.
Okay. How do you, when you look at something like this, and again, this was 120 minor league teams. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to partner with, the Rancho Cucamonga Quakes or the Albuquerque Isotopes. But when you think about partnering with 120 teams, how do you identify what worked and what didn't work?
That's a good question. I think, especially for a brand like Oatly, they are never going to do something that has been done before.
Mhm.
So although, sports parts, sponsorships and partnerships are a dime a dozen and everyone does them, they really wanted to have a unique way in and a unique point of view. So I think for Oatly, it made a lot of sense to really, I mean, you mentioned the game where every single, player in the league was, wearing the jerseys. I mean, that creates a moment of impact that just a standard type of a partnership would not have had, because it was so different. It was the first time that anyone had really done anything like that. So I think, thinking about more broadly, campaigns in general, creating that moment in time that kind of has this magic that people are talking about that can create some virality can really be the key between a successful campaign and a campaign that is standout.
Any other campaigns that you'd like to highlight that you've worked on, whether it was recent or many years ago, so that we can just kind of learn from the past and other examples of things that were fun, and especially that we can learn,
Yeah.
like, this is what PR can do.
Yes. There are so many. It's hard to just pick one. So we did this really crazy campaign for popcorners about 5 or 6 years ago. So Popcorners had created, hopefully, Popcorners, they're the popped corn chips,
Okay.
essentially, real simple ingredients. They had partnered with a network of American farmers, like, generational farmers that, had these cornfields for, some of them like 4 generations. And they had created a new supply chain of non-GMO corn. Might not sound like the sexiest story, and you would, be right in your, assumption of that, but it was a really big deal for the food industry and other industries at that time, because if you're deep in the world of food, non-GMO corn was very, very hard to come by. So, the majority of products out there, if it had corn in it, unless it was organic, it was genetically modified. So this was a huge deal because Popcorners had created this new supply chain for non-GMO corn that was not only used in their products, but across multiple other industries, even outside of food and beverage. So we came up with this idea of, if like crop circles,
Mhm.
aliens coming down, and that's where this idea was inspired from. So we actually partnered with one of Popcorners farmers that was part of this new supply chain, and we also partnered with the Non-GMO Project, and we made this living billboard. It was crop art essentially, but we were essentially trying to raise awareness about non-GMO corn, why it was so important, how it was actually going to support family American farmers. We had this amazing drone footage that was time-lapse photography. And I remember being on the ground for the cutting of the field and everything. And some of our workers didn't show up. So me and the client, the guy who was, leading, like, the project manager of the day said, well, everyone grab a machete and let's get out in the fields. We only have, 2 days to cut this crop art. So me and the client are there, chopping down like 10-foot stalks of corn with our machetes. So it was a very memorable campaign for me personally because of that. But we had incredible, media coverage for it. AP covered it. We had a huge feature in Fast Company, tons of other business and trade press, so it definitely achieved, the client's objective of getting that buzz for their supply chain of corn.
I think there's a great lesson there in that you never know what you're going to have to do for the client. And it might mean a machete in order to get to work if people don't show up, right?
We are not afraid to get our hands dirty. We always joke about that. We really mean it.
All right, let me get to some other questions here from San Diego State students. And let's see. Okay, what is the this is from a fourth-year marketing major. What is the most rewarding part of working in public relations?
The most rewarding part, I would say for me personally, I love the industry that we operate in. I've always been a huge nerd when it comes to, nutrition and wellness. And I love the brands that we work with and I want them to succeed. I think it's very exciting to see the mainstream appeal and awareness of the natural foods industry. When I first started in this career, natural foods were not cool. It was not something that influencers were talking about. There weren't even influencers back then, but it was really that more kind of deep green granola, like only hippies eat natural food. And now it's so gratifying and exciting just to see how mainstream it's become. And especially, I think that the younger generations and students just like yours now are a big part of that movement, which is really exciting and cool because they're the future. So if they love it, then I think that the future is very bright for this industry. So I think for me personally, yeah, after 17 years of doing natural food marketing, that's the most gratifying thing to me.
I tell you what, the last time that I was on campus and I saw the different types of foods that were available for students and then learning that their food cards, right? I was at the Courtyard Cafe in East Commons in the 90s, and there wasn't a whole lot of healthy options, but just seeing that there's acai bowls, that there's a Trader Joe's that's basically right on campus. It's just such a different world, and I think all of this kind of like lends itself to having more of an awareness of it as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's incredible to see how ubiquitous it's become, whether you're going to a regular grocery store or, like you mentioned on campus. I think a lot of people on my team might have a different response. I mean, the most gratifying thing for a PR person is to get that big win, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a big segment on the Today Show for your client or a big feature, in Entrepreneur Magazine or New York Times. I mean, that's like your day is made, maybe your week. But yeah, it's a little different for everyone, I'm sure.
All right, here's another question from a second-year public relations major who wants to know just if someone is struggling with what to do after college and like where to get started. And I know we kind of talked about this earlier in terms of like LinkedIn and internships, but let's say that Natalie, you did know that you really like this industry. If someone doesn't know, what are some tips that you might be able to give for someone who's trying to like figure out where should I begin?
Yeah, I would say just start. I think the more experience that you can get the earlier on, you will find something that you really love. You said that was from a second year student?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, you still have a good 2 years to still test it out. I mean, start doing internships now if you have the ability to do it. I would try different types of internships. You can take a look at boutique agencies, versus larger global agencies versus in-house. Also, I would say, students may not like hearing this, but like, don't waste your summers,
Mm-hmm.
intern over the summer, just work. I would say just start because the more experience that you have early on, the better shape you'll be in once you graduate, and you'll hopefully have found something that you're like, I really love this internship that I did, 2 summers ago. I'm going to go back and explore that. And it will also be a wonderful way to build your professional network early on, which is very important.
The other thing I'm going to add to what Natalie just said is don't assume that, oh, the summer starts in 3 weeks. Let me go get an internship. You need to plan for these things way in advance. If
Yeah.
anything, you should be planning for the fall semester right now, or maybe even winter break or next spring, the way that these internships are done. So plan
Yeah.
way in advance in order to get these. And I'm going to pat myself on the back slightly here and say during spring break, I went to spring training because number one, I loved baseball and I wanted to watch baseball, but I also knew like it was a way that I would just learn, that I would just pick things up through osmosis. I remember getting press passes for the Daily Aztec to do interviews during spring training. My friends were going to Mexico. I was going to spring training to do interviews because I knew it's what I wanted to do. So anytime
Yeah.
that you have free away from class, get out there and do something.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I didn't mention PRSSA, but that is a great organization as well. I was involved for one semester, and met a lot of great contacts. I think especially when you're just starting your career out, networking, don't underestimate the value of networking, kind of starting to build your professional network, because you never know when one of those people may have an opportunity, and just be proactive about letting people know, hey, I'm looking for an internship. Do you know anyone that might be looking? Or tap your network, because that's how a lot of opportunities can come your way too.
Well, speaking of that, Natalie, I think I would be remiss if I did not ask you, how would students find out if Rachael Kay or Finn Partners is looking for interns, or whether they're looking for entry level? How should people go about contacting you, the agency, finding out about when there might be an opening?
Yeah, absolutely. So do not go to the RKPR website, because that one, we don't have job postings there live. But if you go to the Finn Partners website, or if you follow us on social, we'll all those opportunities are posted there. And Finn Partners does have an internship program. They actually will place interns across different offices virtually. Some of them can be in person, but yeah, all of the open, job posting and internship programs, you can find them all on the Finn Partners website. Yeah,
All
or LinkedIn.
right, outstanding. All right, we're just about ready to wrap things up. But before we do, I like to, number one, ask our guests to brag about any other SDSU alums that you want to give shout outs to. It can be as many as you want. It can be someone you know or don't know, but we like to spread the word about how many other SDSU alums are making us proud out there in the world. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, I've already shouted out Rachel a few times, but Rachel is also an SDSU alum, if I didn't mention that. So I'd be remiss not to mention her. She's been my work wife for, gosh, 17 plus, almost 18 years. My dad also went to San Diego State, which is, he was not pushing me to go to San Diego State by any means. But, I think like a lot of folks, I fell in love with San Diego, and, State had an amazing comms program. So that's where I ended up. My husband and his dad are also SDSU alum. They still have season tickets to the men's basketball and football games. So they're out there cheering for our Aztecs at every home game. And well, I mean, Ralph Rubio, I think
Hmm.
I got to give a shout out to Ralph
Yes.
Rubio. He totally changed the fish taco game forever. Yeah, I've never met him, and we don't represent Rubios, but I love myself a good fish taco. So I'm proud of that one.
As a Northern California kid, I'll never forget the first time I was on campus and I saw Rubio's. I was like, wait, what? Fish tacos? And then, of course, all the SDSU, all the San Diego kids were like, dude, these are the best. You have to try them. And immediately falling in love. And then every time I see a Rubio's, I was just in Las Vegas for the Mountain West Conference tournament and I saw Rubio's and I was like, oh, SDSU alum.
I mean, he put fish tacos on the map.
Hmm.
It's amazing. But
Hmm.
yeah, SDSU. I mean, that's a great story right there.
Anything else that I should have asked that I didn't, that you would like to add, whether it's just advice, whether it's just anything else that I'd like to give you the open floor here before we wrap things up, Natalie?
Yeah. I mean, I would say for anyone who is really interested in PR, I would say, and we talked about it a little bit, but do a few internships, get lay of the land. I think sometimes people may go into PR because they think it's very glamorous and we're planning parties and events and working with celebrities. Some publicists do that, but not all of us do, and I think that it's really important to try some different things to find your passion, and also be proactive about it. These are skills that you can also translate, in your career once you get started somewhere. But I would also just say, you have to be an amazing writer, number one. Just because we're not journalists does not mean that it's not important. We still use AP style at our agency, and you're pitching journalists. So you have to understand how to get them to open your email, one, and how to write a pitch that is crafted in a way where they can easily understand the story and write about it. I would also encourage anyone who is wanting a career in PR, even in this day and age, you have to read and watch the news and get familiar with the media outlets. I hear all the time when I'm interviewing, I hear a comment if I'll ask, where do you get your news from, or what's your favorite media outlet? And people will just say, TikTok or Instagram or Meta. Those are channels, they're media channels. They're not media outlets, so I think it's really important, especially if you want to go into consumer PR for national brands, to watch the Today Show, read the New York Times, read Health Magazine. I mean, these are all digitally available and most print is defunct. But if you read media outlets and get familiar with what they're covering, their form of journalism, you will be legs above the competition, so to speak, in terms of when you're going to apply for a job, because you inherently understand the media, and that is so critical to a lot of what we do. So I wouldn't underestimate that.
And that's really good. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I just realized that there was one more question from a student that I forgot to ask, which was, what do you think about the problems we're facing as journalists in terms of people just not being active audience members anymore? And I guess that goes back to, that's your job as PR, is to give them a reason to be actively involved in, I guess. But you answered that better than me.
No, I mean, I think you have a good point. It's, media has evolved by leaps and bounds since I first started doing PR. Back in the day, I'll say, it was, pitching print and long lead. You needed to pitch 6 to 8 months out. And, there's a handful of print left, and there are some long lead that will, take longer to come to fruition. But most all media in terms of editorial these days is very, very quick turn. And, I think it's also important for anyone going into PR to remember that, we don't work for journalists and journalists don't work for us. It is a true symbiotic relationship. Our role is to be a resource for journalists. Media newsrooms are shrinking so significantly, and a lot of these editors or reporters, if they're still on staff, they may have 4 or 5 different publications that they're overseeing content for, and they may be churning out 10 to 15 stories a day. So the deadlines that journalists are under are intense, they're extreme, and you need to build relationships and be a resource for them, rather than demanding that they cover your client or something like that, in order to generate success. So that was a little bit of a ramble, but I would just say, yeah, the state of media, it is sad. I mean, I know that, just I think 2 weeks ago, there was another mass round of layoffs at Hearst, and you're seeing it happen all the time. The majority of writers these days are freelancers, because a lot of outlets can't sustain a full, in-house editorial team on staff. So it's a little bit distressing as a PR professional and someone who loves journalism. I mean, that was my initial major before I went into PR, but it's not all doom and gloom. And I would just say that there's still, so much opportunity for publicists and journalists to really work together. I see our role as really being able to help and enable journalists to, create content more quickly and easily. It's kind of that long form journalism that is a little bit more, challenging these days, because there's not a lot of pictures, sometimes people lose interest, but there's still a time and a place for it.
Well, that was a really good ramble with a lot of good advice. And so thank you for that. This was really fun, Natalie. It was great to meet you. So much great advice. Appreciate you joining us here on the Where You At podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Once again, that is Natalie Terashima. She is a senior partner for Rachael Kay PR, which is a Finn Partners company. My name is Josh Sushan. I am your host for the Where You At podcast. Appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.